Welcome. We are excited that you are here. And if you're here for the Project Humanities hosted conversation on saying no to people pleasing, then you're in the right place. So we are excited that you are here. I want to introduce myself. I am Professor Neil Lester at Arizona State University, and I am the founding director of the hosting organization tonight, Project Humanities. Would you please, which is our uh, protocol here, is tell us where you're joining us from so that we can see your reach, our reach, and welcome you officially. So just tell us where you're joining us from. Um, Go to the next slide, please. Project Humanities acknowledges that our institution, Arizona State University, is situated on the ancestral lands of indigenous people, past, present, and future. We thank and honor the Native American tribes and sovereign nations of the Salt River Valley, including the Akimel O'odham, the Ankh, Akimel O'odham, and Peepash nations, whose stewardship of the land and waterways allows us to be here now. In addition, we honor their continued and many contributions today. We welcome you from all over the USA and beyond, especially on this day, which is our National Martin Luther King holiday. What a year this has been. It was exactly a year ago that we hosted this annual event. We did not realize that it was on the inauguration day, and so much has transpired and is transpiring. So it's appropriate that we at least acknowledge Dr. King's words in the context of what we're trying to do with Project Humanities more broadly and this program tonight. Dr. King, in a speech from 1967, which I urge you to read, it's called The Other Americas. Oftentimes we stop at I Have a Dream, and some of us selectively choose the last part of that speech about the content of our character without actually focusing on the first part. But I'd like to remind you of this speech in 1967, where he says large segments of society. Now, his exact words were large segments of white society. So Dr. King was not quote unquote colorblind. Society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. About justice and humanity. And that's the part that Project Humanities has embraced when we created several years ago something called Humanity 101. Humanity 101 is a secular, non-faith-based commitment to the principles that you should see on the right side of your screen. A commitment to honoring these principles and living these principles of compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, and self-reflection. And if you haven't already signed it, we encourage you to sign the pledge and just make them a kind of mirror of how we want to live despite all the stuff that's happening around us. How can we practice these principles? And we have at Project Humanities tried to filter all of our programming through the lens of Humanity 101. And I think this conversation tonight is but one of the many events and activities that we have that offer a lens through which to understand each other and ourselves better. So thank you. Let me give you a sense of where this program tonight comes from, and then I'll introduce the panelists. I am a professor and I teach, and I'm often a little bit jarred when students will come to me and they'll say, when I've given an assignment, tell me what you want. And I'm a little thrown by that because I recognize that they're asking me a genuine question, but I'm not always sure how to answer it because I don't always know what I want. What I can often say is what I don't want. But that triggers something in me that aligns with this notion of people pleasing. Because it sounds to me that that question comes from, tell me what you want, I'll tell you what I want, and then I'll give it to you. So therefore, we'll both be happy. And I think that's one of the myths we're going to try to dispel tonight, that telling people what you want and getting what you want may not be the same. So, joining me in this conversation tonight are two uh, very credentialed folks who can tease out nuances beyond the sort of curiosities that I have. They are Dr. Erica Tatum Sheed and soon to be Dr. Ryan M. Sheed. So, thank you both for joining and accepting my invitation. I hope that wasn't a form of people pleasing by saying yes to my invitation, but introduce yourselves and then we'll get into the conversation.
All right, I'll go first because Ryan's his introduction is much longer than my introduction. So,
Okay.
so like you said, my name is Dr. Erica. I am a licensed clinical social worker. Actually got my MSW from ASU, so proud of that. I did get my doctorate from USC, so I'm a little bit of a traitor, as Ryan says in that lens. I am a registered play therapist supervisor and a certified daring way facilitator. And so one of the things I specialize in is working with children and adolescents and trying to basically give them the skills that they need to have a voice so we can kind of avoid people pleasing. So I'm excited to talk with you all tonight about this.
Looking forward to that contribution. All right, soon to be Dr. Ryan.
See, I usually just introduce myself that I'm just Dr. Erica's husband, and so
Okay.
it's not nearly as long as hers. But my name's Ryan Shade. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Um, at this point in my career, I've held over 30,000 sessions, individual couples. I've worked in agencies in HIV and with adults with serious mental illness, and now I'm primarily a couples therapist in our private practice that I founded in 2011.
And you both own or founded the Integrated Mental Health Associates. Is that correct? All right. And look,
Yes,
somebody
and
on our team silence the person who's not muted, please. Thank you. I apologize for that background stuff. All right. Okay. Well, welcome, and let's talk a little bit about people pleasing. I've divided the conversation into six parts, which we've gone over, but these parts will not necessarily guide the conversation or dictate the conversation. So, let me just say this too before I go. The context of this program, when we decided we were going to have a program on Martin Luther King holiday evening, the idea is that this would complement the service, the memes posted on social media, the outreach, the marches, and the reflections. We wanted there to be an education piece. And that has been quite rewarding for many of us who are not competing with other events on the evening of. So that's why we do it this time. We've done it both in person and virtually. So I want to start with an engagement piece that we can think about and then have our audience respond to. So, audience members, think of a recent situation where you said yes, but wanted to say no. What happened? Share one word or phrase only. So we don't need you to write an essay. We don't need us to to do a rant. Uh, what happened? So remember to answer that part. Think of a recent situation when you said yes, but wanted to say no. What happened? Share one word or phrase. Okay. And then I'm hoping that this will sort of launch this conversation. Uh, Shades. Shades. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. And if you see anything that you want to pick up on, then oh goodness. Wow. Look at that. Oh gosh. That answers the questions, doesn't it? Where we're gonna go. Oh my gosh. Yes. Hey
certainly
Jocelyn.
does.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Uh, so what that tells me is that everybody on some level has done this. They've said yes to something, but I don't know if saying it once or twice necessarily makes us a people pleaser. What determines if we're a people pleaser or not? And either of you can take that. When have I crossed into the people pleasing identity?
Well, I think it's exactly the question that you asked, right? When you say yes, when you really want to say no, right? I mean, and obviously there are power dynamics in which somebody had said job interview, for example, right? Yeah, there's some times where it's like what do I do here, right? I need this job type deal. Um, But in general, I think you might make it like if the power is even, or at least roughly even, and you say yes when you really want to say no, then it leads to something someone else said, which was resentment, right? So in relationship, it's like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do this for you. Sometimes people hold it against the other person, right? Or they keep score. I hear that a lot in my office. Like, oh, I've done all of this for this person and they didn't do anything for me. It's like, okay, so we're doing tick marks, and then okay, you're at 7 and they're at 6, and so therefore they owe you one type deal.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think I've always looked at it through the lens of like, am I compromising my own self-care or my own self? Right. So if am I saying yes to something and I saw a bunch of exhaustion, right? So am I saying yes to things that I know is going to lead me to deplete myself just to prove that like I'm a good person or I'm a worthy person, right? So that's when we slip into that people pleasing.
Hmm. I guess I'm asking, saying it one time doesn't necessarily make you a people pleaser. And Ryan, you mentioned the power dynamics. Part of the what's missing from the podcast for those who are able to listen to it, to me, was that it talks about people pleasing among peers. And while there are certainly parallels when you talk about couples, intimate couples, friendships, even family relationships, there does seem to be a power dynamic that has to be taken into account when we're talking about the workplace. And you're not talking about a coworker, you're actually talking about someone who is your boss, somebody who is your supervisor. Do those same principles play out, though, when we're talking, somebody who can determine whether or not you get a good performance review, or somebody who determines whether or not you are going to get a promotion? How do those things differ and how do they intersect, whether it's peers or a power position with the workplace or classroom?
Man, I think that's a whole other Zoom. Because right, because you get into this where if you people please too much, then your peers at the workplace then see you as a kiss up, and now
Okay.
now you're affecting those types of things. Or um, you know, Dr. Eric and I are always we say yes a lot. But what we talk about is that we say yes to really cool stuff all the time, like this, right? So it's like no, that's totally in our values. That's totally in, who we understand ourselves to be, right? Because social work has very specific values to it, and so. We were in the MLK Day parade this morning in Mesa, and that was, it's like, you need to get up, you need to get there, you need to do all the things, but also it's really cool and it's really like aligned with who we are, right?
Hmm.
And so that comes, I think, sometimes to like your value system and understanding who you are as well.
Okay. Well, and you don't feel resentment because you went to the parade. I mean, I think that's part of the key, is it not? It's somehow feeling that you did stuff not because you wanted to, but because you felt like you had to. The podcast points out being able to distinguish between a suggestion versus a command. Um, I hope that in doing this tonight, and now I'm going to be reflecting on this the whole time, that you did it because there was a part of you that wanted. And this is not the same as saying your plate is too full. Because if your plate is too full, that's when you start potentially moving to that space where people resent saying yes. Okay. Dr. Erica, did you want to add something to that?
Ryan stole all of the words from me.
Well, we got some more words for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so if a simple definition is people pleasing, how would you define that? Just the simplest definition of people pleasing.
Ooh, saying yes. I'll go back to it like saying yes when I'm trying to prove myself to someone, that I'm trying to prove that I'm worthy versus saying yes because I want to do it.
Okay, because you want to do it. Does the podcast do a pretty good job of kind of laying out the parameters around around people pleasing?
I think it did. I enjoyed. I was one of those things. Wish it was a little bit longer because I'm like,
Hmm.
wait,
We can't,
let's go deeper, let's go more. But
we
I
can't
think
do
it
that
did a
in
good
20
job.
minutes, Dr. Erica, because people
Right.
won't listen.
Right. I know you kind of those of us who are like kind of geek out over this stuff,
Okay.
we wanted a
Uh-huh.
little bit more, but those who are like, this is just enough to get me started thinking, it
Right.
was the perfect amount of time.
Just enough. And the so here's what I thought. Okay, so they start off with defining what people pleasing is, which is a good place to start. If you're doing something and you don't want to do it, and you're having all these feelings that people shared with us in the chat, then you're probably people pleasing. Now, one of the things they also point out is that people pleasing can look like perfectionism. It can also look like hyperconfidence. I'm not sure I understand how those two ideas play into people pleasing. Because I thought people pleasing was just the opposite, where people don't feel confident and they want to somehow feel more confident because you told them what they need to do in order to feel confident about whatever they're acting or thinking. So do those align? Because I got a little confused by those.
So I took it as hyper competence, right? Being really good at a lot of things because you're always trying to please, which is sort of aligned with perfectionism,
Okay.
right? And so that's that piece where and in Murray Bowen was an early family theorist, and he talked about um, uh, this idea of sort of like a reflected sense of self, needing other people to tell us whether
Mm,
we're okay or not.
okay.
And so then I'm going to do what you want me to do so that you love me or that you validate me or you tell me I'm okay, because none of us really gets through childhood being validated fully for who we are, right?
Oh, goodness.
As parents of three ourselves, I'm certain that we're messing up our kids every single day. So
Ugh,
so the challenge is, right, if we're always chasing this reflected sense of self, and you see it in people with a high achievement or high income, or they need other people to tell them they're great all the time, and so that idea of I always think about it like I chase mirrors. I need people to hold up mirrors to tell me whether I'm okay or not.
mhm.
And if they don't, then oh my gosh, my self-esteem is a 3 out of 10. And if they do, then it's a 10 out of 10. And I keep going back and forth on this, roller coaster of self-esteem instead of having an internal sense of self where I know that I'm okay.
Wow. Oh, that's a sermon in and of itself right there, isn't it? Oh, goodness.
Mhm.
Childhood. And I know that jumps into the origins of this. You said something like, as children, we don't often get what we think we need in order to feel validated.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
the idea, at least in family theory, is that we have one more affirming and validating parent and one less, and we're always sort of chasing, even in our partners that we choose, the less validating parent, and somebody telling us, "Hey, you're worthy. Hey, you're valid. Hey,
Right.
you're okay. Hey, I love you." And we end up often with partners and bosses and people who don't validate us the way we want to be validated. So the idea is the challenge is to learn how to self-validate so you don't need that from outside yourself. So that my clients hear this all the time and they get very tired of it. You're whole, complete, and lacking in nothing. You're okay exactly as you are, and you don't need someone else to tell you or to show you. And then you can meet other people without sort of a dependence sort of need to get them to tell you you're okay because you know you're okay.
Oh, goodness. That sounds like that takes a lifetime to get to that. So this sounds like it's the beginning of a therapy counseling session here. Dr. Erica, how do people get socialized into that sort of pattern of behaviors and expectations that are most often not met?
Yeah. So, and you can imagine dinner is very interesting in our house because me and Ryan come from two different perspectives. I'm an Adlerian play therapist, and Adlerian theory, we kind of talk about, and I explain it as as a child, we each have these four jars. And so the four jars that we need to fill are count, courage, capable, and connection. And as you go through childhood, you have experiences that either fill that jar or deplete that jar. And so the second thing we talk about is like our personality priorities are formed based on those experiences we have. And so if I'm somebody who is constantly trying to make sure that I matter and that I count, and it doesn't get filled, then I start having behaviors that fill that for me. Right. So that kind of starts to look like that people pleasing, right? I start saying yes to things. I start constantly volunteering because I'm trying to be validated because I didn't have that. Um, and we can go the opposite way too, right? Like if I don't feel like I matter, guess what? Like I'm burning down the village now because you don't care about me. So it goes both ways. We always say there's
Right.
a more adaptive way and a more maladaptive way that we choose to go. But the other piece too, because a lot of the work I do is particularly with girls and like giving, I run girls groups for self-esteem and confidence, but we also teach our girls that they need to be more accommodating than we do for our men. right? We'll tell for men or for boys, right? We're like, it's okay. You can say no. It's okay to do that. But we teach girls like, no, you got to be nice. You got to be kind. You got to do this. And so then that starts to slip into that, like, this is what's acceptable for me to say yes, to show up, to be the one that's always raising my hand and volunteering to do things. And then that just keeps playing out throughout life.
That's interesting. You said that the the be nice and to be kind because our Humanity 101 principles are often gendered. And when you think about this in a kind of capitalist society that is rewards people for competition and winning, it doesn't really leave space for community and sharing and sort of looking at what we're trying to talk about, which is where people see themselves and each other's through a lens of dignity and humanity. And we talk about this in terms of justice. We talk about that, or I've talked about this, and there can't be any sort of justice if those principles are not acknowledged. And whether this is justice individually or justice, collectively, those principles have to be there. People have to be respected. I'm reading a book now for class called We Refuse. And it's about forceful history of Black resistance by Kelly Carter Jackson. And one of the things she says there is that the history of progress is about refusal, and that's refusal to accept a status quo. But that's also the thing that gets people in trouble is when people refuse. So this notion of wanting to please sort of aligns with, well, what is the status quo? And that quotation from Dr. King sort of reminds us that if progress is going to be made, whether that's individual self or societally, we can't just sort of give in to a status quo. So that's interesting. You did mention this about the socializing of girls and women. Um, that can also translate to other minoritized groups. So how does that play out? It's not necessarily a workplace situation. It's not necessarily a classroom, although those could be at play. But there are these other dynamics, and we could add age to this. We could add race, and we could probably add other intersections to how this plays out because the power is still there. So maybe we could tease out how people pleasing can be looked at through the lens of intersectional identities. Let's play with that a little bit.
Before we were like prepping this, it's like, oh, I'm gonna tell a joke about how like if the three of us walked in a bar, who's getting served first? But I was like, maybe that's not appropriate. And um,
And
but
you notice she did it anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that was one of the things we talked about too. We thought, okay, this will be an interesting combination because there's a certain way in which Ryan and I share some things in common. And there's another way in which Dr. Erica and I share some things in common. And there's a way in which each of us is responding to the world differently and the world is responding to us differently. All right, back to your comment.
But no, but I mean, that's it, right? So we know, and I'm trying to figure out like a politically correct way to say it, but the reality is the closer you are to white, the more acceptable your behavior is seen, even if we're doing the exact same thing, right? And so the further we are from that, we have to kind of almost like code switch a little bit or censor ourselves a little bit to be seen as acceptable. I mean, the fact that me and Ryan often train with each other. Like we'll do a training together, and Ryan is automatically given more credibility just because he's a white presenting male, right? And whenever we get the evaluations back, it's like we need more research from me, right? And I'm like, well, I literally spent lots of money and lots of years in school doing the research on this topic, right? Even in if we are at a restaurant and there's a issue with an item that we ordered, I don't send it back because I don't want to be seen as like being rude or things like that. But Ryan can send it back 17 times and they're still like, oh, we're so happy you came, So all of those things come into play. And I think there's another piece too. It's not just race or gender. I think also based on where you grew up. Right.
Okay.
So I grew up in the Midwest. Ryan grew up out here. And even that we approach things very differently because you want to be seen as more acceptable or more worthy. And so that comes into how we show up in society.
All right. Ryan, did you want to add to that since we just talked about you?
No, I'm
Okay.
used to it,
Okay. Well, here's the other thing that is a lesson in privilege, though. For those
Mhm.
who hate that that P word, that other P word we're asking to the conversation of people pleasing and privilege, I can say that's certainly true as somebody who grew up in the Deep South. But I can also say that there's a way in which resistance and refusal could also mean death and violence to
Mhm.
those who did not say yes. I mean, I'm thinking of Jim Crow times and slavery and Reconstruction and all those U.S. history moments that didn't allow people to not be people pleasers. And in fact, that's where the step and fetch it and the grinning comes from that then became this tool that was then used against people who were minoritized and black and brown. The assimilation also became one of those ways in which that was people pleasing. I think it's Professor Carol Anderson has a book called White Anger, and you may know that as well. But she said something about it's not that that white people hate black people. It's just that because black people who stay in their places are not threatening. Those who are resilient, those who disrupt the status quo are the ones that have to be dealt with. And, we could certainly apply that to Dr. King. You know, people seem to love Dr. King now that he's dead. But there are, Dr. Bernice King reminds us that when her father was assassinated, that he didn't just die, that he was one of the most hated men in the country. So there are ways in which there are consequences that are quite substantial if you don't people please in the certain circumstance. So I offered that politically and historically so that we don't sort of forget that. I want to pose a question to our audience there in terms of the people pleasing so that I know the last time that you people please, what was your motivation for saying yes? What I asked you in the first question is, how did you feel? I'm asking now, what was your motivation for saying yes? Because often the people pleasing is desiring of a certain result. And so I'm asking for that second part now. The last time you said yes, but wanted to say no, what motivated that decision? What motivated that decision? And see if we get any patterns there. Are you seeing any patterns there?
Yeah, lots
Lots
of
of obligation, lots of
obligation.
relationship.
Yeah, trying to maintain a relationship.
Okay. So that's the risk part of that then, right? It's like I'm going to do this because somebody has asked me to do it, even though I really don't want to do it. But in order for me to maintain this relationship that I think I have, because the relationship may need a reassessment. Talk about that part, because that to me feeds into the myth of these myths around people pleasing.
Well, it's interesting because when we had first chatted about this, we talked about it in an actual sort of like intimate partner couple type of thing and how people pleasing works into that. And not to take it back to childhood again, right? But again, if we don't get that validation, we're looking for it. We're looking for our partner to love us, tell us we're okay. We have mythology in this culture that says love is about safety and stability and security and someone who will make me feel good when I feel bad, which if you talk to anybody who's been married more than a few years, it's like, wait, that's not what my partner does. How come, and so but a lot of it then turns into that people pleasing piece of like, okay, I'll do what you want me to do so that then you'll tell me that you love me or you tell me that I'm valid or you tell me that I'm okay. And so it's interesting. You can almost look at relationships, intimate partner relationships, as a power imbalance in some sense too, because the person who has a less of a need for validation then sort of controls that piece until the person with more need for validation figures out how to self-validate if they ever do to where they can actually be sort of like equal peers there, kind of what I tell couples in the canoe rowing in the same direction, right? Or two people not staring at each other but staring together in the same direction, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, I always go back to just this thought of like we're wired for connection, right? And we will do whatever it takes to stay connected, even if that means things that we don't want to do. And so if I'm somebody who's constantly looking for like, just let me know I belong here, just let me know I'm okay, I'm going to continue to do whatever I need to do to stay in that relationship, even if it means sacrificing myself.
Well, it's when I first mentioned this topic in the office, because that's often where topics come up as we're just sort of moving from task to task individually. But I mentioned the notion of people pleasing earlier, and there didn't seem to be any interest in the topic. It sort of just kind of fell flat. I mentioned it more recently, and it seemed like the office came alive with these stories. And there were stories of relationships between siblings. There were stories about parent-child relationships. And most, at least if I'm remembering correctly, there was angst about what would happen if I don't please. What would happen if I don't please? And that was what prompted that question, what motivated that decision? And I guess how do you deal with when you've done what you have been told to do and you still didn't get the result that you wanted? That to me feels like that's part of the mythologizing of people pleasing. I may not be pleased, and I'll share the example that I shared. The only whipping that I got from my as a child, and I was not necessarily an angelic child, but the only whooping that I got was from my dad, and it was because I didn't sweep the porch to his satisfaction. And it's interesting because I thought that I had swept the porch. I just didn't sweep it to his satisfaction. So for me, it wasn't like I disobeyed him. It was that he wasn't satisfied with what I had given him. So I guess I'm asking the futility of this is also the mythologizing of what people pleasing will result in. How will it meet the expectation? How will it do it? It traps people into this space of, well, what if I don't get the results? How do people deal with that when they don't get the results that they wanted, the promotion they wanted by staying late, or the whatever you've done, or the affection or the attention that you wanted? How do people deal with that?
I think this is why we tell people not to people please, because you're never going to get what you want. You're never going to get the result that you want. It's
Okay.
just this
So
continuous.
that's it. That's the
Yeah,
simple. Stop doing it.
just
Yes.
stop doing it.
Okay.
Because the bar is going to continuously be moving, right? Because you're deciding this is enough. This is exactly what this person wants, and that person's like, well, if you're going to give this much, all right, I want more. And it's just constantly chasing that. And so if we're focused on what makes me feel good, what makes me feel validated, that's not external, then we
Right.
can avoid all of that.
Right. Well, Ryan, you mentioned in a conversation in some notes last night, you said, well, this is how I'm paraphrasing it, and you can complicate it. You said people just need to know who they are.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like that's like something I when I'm teaching literature and students want to say, Janie in their eyes watching God found herself. And I sort of steer away from that because it feels static to me. And so I'm wondering
Mhm.
how, from your perspective, how does one gauge who you are if in fact who you are tends to be evolving based on the experiences that you have? So that would be
I mean,
my iterative.
maybe we could qualify it, who you are right now, right? Like,
Okay, all right, okay,
but what's interesting is you stop and think about it. Your core values haven't really changed that much since you were raised with them,
okay,
and either it's what your family of origin gave you or what they didn't give you that you didn't like. But ultimately, what's important to you is probably roughly the same as what was important to you when you were 10 or 15 years old.
let's
And
pause right
so
there on that because I
go
want
ahead.
us to meditate on that. Let's repeat that again for those in the back. What does
All
that
right.
say now about your core values?
So who you are, your core values probably haven't significantly changed since you were about 10 or 15 years old. So who you understand yourself to be and what's important to you is probably roughly the same. I heard it said one time that the only two people you really have to make sure they're happy with you is your 10-year-old self and your future 95-year-old self. And
Wow.
it's a really interesting thing because sometimes I'll ask my clients, I'm like, hey, would your 10-year-old self be really like be happy with you right now or think you're living a cool life or something like that? And for some people it's like, oh, like I have let that person down and I really need to make some shifts. And for some people, it's like, yeah, I've actually done even better. Like I've done even more and look at all this cool stuff. He for me, he would be amazed. Like I grew up without a dad and I'm a very committed, involved father of three. Like my 10-year-old self would be like hugging me and crying for being there, and so that's the idea is but staying in your values. And one of the ways I think so I've always been on like a spiritual quest my entire life, like trying to figure myself out, trying to understand and own myself, partially, I think, because I did grow up without a dad. So I had to figure out sort of the male thing myself in some ways. And I had some really amazing people walk along the way, a therapist of mine, a priest, that sort of thing. Um, but kind of, trying to figure out your path in some ways is going back and maybe, you know, reading things, talking to people, but understanding core values first of all, and then understanding what yours are, right? What really matters to you? What will you really stand up for? And we talked about like where we are in the country right now will tell us in some ways what we'll really stand up for, or what will just be like, man, that's really bad over there, and so the really getting down to who we truly are. And I think you're right. It is a lifelong process. I hope that every single person on this call, if you make it to 95 years old, you're still trying to figure out fully who you are at that point.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Erica, you just heard us talk about our dads. There sounds like there's a theme there that we certainly didn't choreograph. What did you make of that, Dr. Erica? I'm sure you've heard Ryan's story about his relationship with, but you didn't hear about my first and only whipping coming from my dad, though.
But yeah, I always, especially when I'm working with parents and trying to explain to them, like when we're talking about like self-esteem, right? It's not from ourself, it's from those early connections that we have. So how did my parents talk to me? How did my parents treat me? And that kind of is what informs us of how can I be in the world, right? So that like you take those early relationships. I know Ryan says 10, I say 8,
Hmm.
right? It's because I work mainly with girls, and so we know self-esteem drops at 8. So it's like, what
Hmm.
messages have we been getting about how we can
Hmm.
show up and who I can be in the world too, right? We see a lot of that of like, well, you know, this wasn't good enough. And so that's probably plays over in your head like, okay, it was just sweeping the floor, but that probably shows up in a lot of the work that you do of
Hmm.
like, how can I make sure this is the best up to par for anybody, like with the highest standards? We just continue to play that out throughout our adulthood as well.
Oh goodness, I felt like that was a therapy moment there. Yes. Well, because as you're mentioning that, I'm thinking so maybe there's a metaphor there that may have to do with some, what some have called sort of overachieving, and maybe the perfectionism is where you're doing and doing and doing because you don't want the result to be what that was when you know that you did what you're supposed to do. And that does sort of lead into this wheel of futility because you can never know. You can't predict others' behavior. So I totally get what you're saying now, Ryan, about the total evolution, but the values part, the values that we have as children, they are pretty solidly foundationed in our adulthood. I want to hear what people in the audience think about that, or how do they respond to that? Is that true based on who you are now and the values that you had? Do you see those playing out, or do you see something different? Um, I'm not challenging what you said. I'm just wanting to see if that seems to be true. I mean, if that's the case, then we should do a values analysis and say, okay, what do we value? Or how would you go about proving or not proving, because this is not a debate we have to prove. How do you ascertain what your values were at 10 to see if they match your values at 50? How do you do that? Values analysis.
I think not very empirical, of course, but I
Okay.
think it's pretty easy to ask somebody, what did you want to be when you were 10 years old, when you grew up? And whatever that is, why? Right. So I just had this conversation with a client the last couple of weeks, and he said, well, I want to be a superhero. And he sort of like threw it away. And I was like, whoa, 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 hold on. Why did you want to be a superhero? Well, because I wanted to like save people and I wanted
Okay.
to be strong and I wanted to, okay. And I had a client years ago who was uh, a gay man who was closeted for a very long time. And at 10 years old, he would cut out, furniture and put it together and he wanted to be an interior designer, but he knew that wasn't like a manly thing to do. So he wasn't allowed to do it and all that kind of stuff. But like
Mhm.
his values were in aesthetics and design and understanding. And so, and it carried him through. My mom used to tell stories that at 6, 7 years old with the starving children ads that used to be on TV in the 80s and things like that, I would
They
literally
still
cry,
are. They still
right?
are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
would, and
The
so it's one of
poverty
those things where
porn.
it's like,
Yes. Hmm.
yeah. And so understanding those pieces that
Hmm.
who we are. But I actually, with my clients, I'll do what's called a personal values card sort, which is actually pretty easy to find online if you just put in personal values card sort. And it's 83 different values, and you sort it into important, not important, and very important. And ultimately, what you say is very important to you are roughly your core values.
Okay. I, I can that exercise, Dr. Erica, be I'm trying to think of that exercise and what you just said, Ryan, from a more intersectional perspective. Because I wonder if those values change. Well, even that question though, because I've dealt with texts that deal with what do you want to be when you grow up? And as long as you are, and I'm touching the chair here because I want to make sure I say this diplomatically, and I'm using Audre Lorde's definition of white supremacy. If you're white and heterosexual and cisgender and able-bodied and mostly Christian and financially stable, then that question seems a little more straightforward. If, for example, you are not part of that group and you are othered, then that what do you want to be when you grow up potentially creates a different set of values, doesn't it? Because I mean, you ask now, for example, if we look at, I do a lot of work on violence against Black children, and we've talked about how the talk is different now. The talk for white kids, and particularly white males, is very different from the talk for Black kids. The talk for boys is very different from the talk to girls. So I guess I'm wondering if how does that then shape the value system that responds to an identity that is more intersectional than what do you want to be when you grow up? Because if you're going to grow, if you, we'll go back because you did mention that a little bit with the gay closeted person. Dr. Erica, can you speak to that a little bit? And maybe I'm stretching or
No, I don't think you're stretching at all because and I will tell you, I very rarely pose that question to a client in that form because of that. Because I've had a kid come back and say, "Well, I just want to be alive when I
I
grow
want to
up."
be alive.
Right. And so it's like, okay, right. That's a tough place to go after that, right?
Right.
I usually do it as like, where do you feel you count the most? Like, what are you doing that you feel like you're like you're filled with joy? Like I kind of rephrase it that way. We're
Okay.
still getting to the same place, but we're removing it from this like necessarily a job because like, do they have they seen anybody
That was where I was going.
yeah, that's in the same field as them, like things like that.
Right.
I always joke that, I'm a social worker, but I tried to do everything but be a social worker because both my parents were social workers. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with social work. I'm going to go as far as possible because I want to be different. I want to like, blaze my own trail. And here I am with two
Right.
degrees in social work. Um,
Right.
but it's shifting it back to like, and it goes back to what Ryan said, like at your core, remove what society says, remove what like your parents have said, what your neighborhood says about you. Like, where do you feel you matter the most, and how can we translate that into values? So I
Okay.
kind of do it backwards, right? Where
Okay.
do you matter, and then we start assigning some of those core values to that.
Okay. Let's see if we can pull out some comments from the chat because I'm seeing some things about imposter syndrome and see if we can integrate that into our conversation. My team and both shades, do you see any comments there that we want to go back to and kind of tease out? Because I don't want people to think we're in a fishbowl. We want to make sure that we know that people are out there and engaging. So, do my team see any questions or comments that seem to be coming up? And you want to bring to our attention, Nayeli or anybody from our Project Humanities team, if somebody has a real persistent question.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat from Dr. Edward James. What is the alignment of imposter syndrome and people pleasing? potentially imposter syndrome drives excessive approval seeking. I think they're
Okay.
asking what is the alignment between those two.
Okay. Do one of you want to address that? Because I can't address that.
So, I'm a clinical supervisor for therapists, and I've supervised almost 60 people now into independent licensure. And so, imposter syndrome is real in that first you get your master's degree, you get a license, you can go out and therapize people, quote unquote, right? And all of a sudden, it's like I have no idea what I'm doing. Why would anybody ever think that I would? I can't even figure out my own life. How am I going to help someone else figure out their life and that sort of thing? Um, and so I think it's interesting because it goes back to actually what we very first talked about. And as a supervisor, we have to check the people pleasing of the supervisee
Mm,
because then they won't tell us what's really happening. And then also sort of that imposter syndrome and coming in trying to give as a therapist trying to give the client what they want or rather than help them walk through the process. So one of the things that I see as a therapist, a lot of people come in, they're like, okay, what should I do?
right.
And early in my career,
Right.
that was a scary question because, like,
Yeah.
oh, wait, I'm supposed to whatever. And now it's very easy for me to say, I don't know. What do you want to do? Well, but that's why I'm coming to you. Why would I know what you should do? Right? Like what, my job is to walk alongside you, ask you questions, and suss out the different possibilities. You decide one, you go out, you try it. If it works, great. You get to own that success. And if it doesn't work, then you come back, we regroup, and you go with the next, reasonable possibility. And so the imposter syndrome thing, I think, comes in for a lot of people early career in general of like, oh, I'm supposed to know what to do right here and exactly what to do. So that often can lead to people pleasing.
Hmm.
I
Dr.
think
Eric,
even beyond like early career people, I think I still suffer with that very often. I walk in a room and I'm questioning, like, do I belong in this room? Like, why did they ask me to be in this room, right? Like, I think that's our natural, like, second guessing, which I think we also need, right? I need to ask myself that question. Why did they ask me to be in this room? But I need to take it further and answer, like, because I belong here, right? And I think that's sometimes missing for people. But it's challenging. Like, let that question come up and then challenge it. Like, tell yourself why you need to be there, why you were invited to this space. But so I'm not going to say imposter syndrome is completely bad because I think it keeps us moving
hmm
forward when
hmm
we're willing to challenge it.
Well, I'm thinking about when we talked earlier about how do we get indoctrinated into this mode of having some kind of external approval. Look at society as a whole, though. I mean, it seems like that we are continually bombarded with things that tell us that we are not enough. That somehow, we don't need to age. And I know that's intersectional. So we don't need to get old because when you get old, you become devalued. You can't get fat. And now with this phenomenon of weight loss drugs, we see this big celebration of people who have lost lots of weight. And this is not any shades on weight loss. I'm using that as an example of the social messages that tell us that we are not enough, because when we're not enough, that is profitable for those businesses that are selling us the weight loss drugs and the light calorie list this, or so. And now I'm not talking about family now. Earlier we were talking about family. I'm talking about these societal messages, which can be really hard to resist. And I know that people are targeted, not just through social media, but through all of these messages. So let's talk about some of those messages that sort of tell us, and I'm not talking about the Barbie documentary where we're talking about we are Knuff. I'm talking about those messages that come in that clearly wash over us, and some can become susceptible to those messages. So what are some of those messages that are just so commonplace that we may not even think they're actually affecting us toward people pleasing?
So I'm gonna spin this a little bit because I've seen this question in the chat a couple of times about the four
Okay.
jars. So I'm gonna explain the four
Okay.
jars and tie it to this question. So like I said, so we have these four jars, which are courage, count, connection, and capable.
Okay.
And
Courage,
if
count, connection, and capable, the four
incapable,
C's.
the
Okay.
four C's.
Okay.
And so if those aren't achieved in childhood, when we see these messages, right? So if I enter into adulthood or adolescence and I'm already feeling like this jar is not completely filled, those messages then start to come in and I fill it, but in a negative way, right? So if I already feel like I don't count, when I turn on the TV and I see people like me who are being brutalized and things like that, I don't matter, right? The count is just like, do I matter to society as a whole? Like if I disappear tomorrow, will people question like, where's Erica? So if
Hmm.
that's the message, then I fall into this trap of like, maybe these things will make me matter.
Hmm.
Maybe if I dress this way or I wear this makeup or I use this drug to help me get skinny, maybe then I'll matter to people because that's what I'm seeing out there is like these are the people that matter. These are the voices that keep getting elevated versus my own voice.
Hmm.
And the same thing with connection, right? The connection's a big one too. It's like this is what you need to feel like you belong. You need to follow the trend. You need to do what everybody else is doing. And so it just keeps going and going. We say the same thing,
Hmm.
I could go on for like 5 hours about
Well,
those things because that's where my work centers is like we have to make sure that we are doing enough
right.
to fill those jars for ourselves so we don't fall susceptible to those messages. We don't hear that and say, this is how I have to be.
Or at least acknowledge when that other message is just sort of overwhelming and you say, okay, let's stop that. Because I know that I'm qualified. I know that I am not here because of DEI. I know that I'm here because I paid my dues and I'm as good as this person. Is that self part that you were talking about, Ryan, where your value has to be in that self-reflection that allows you to see yourself not through the eyes of how others see you, but how you see yourself? And I'm thinking of W.E.B. Du Bois in that sense, where he talks about double consciousness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because this is the part where Erica says, don't go all eggheady and talk about theory, but I'm going to anyway.
Throw it
Actually,
out,
my
throw it out.
I do a 40-hour CBT, intensive cognitive behavioral therapy intensive for therapists, and it actually starts this weekend. And so it's like it's all, but it's what I think about all the time. But it's basically cognitive behavioral theory at its foundation says that our core negative beliefs about ourselves is really the lenses through which we see everything, right? And so the not good enough. I kind of tell people I see the same five core negative beliefs or maladaptive schemas or however you want to put it. And I'm raising my hand apparently. I see the same five over and over in my office,
Hmm.
and not good enough is the first one I always talk about because it's a shame schema. None of us escape childhood without shame, and so it tells us we're not good enough. There's something wrong with us, like you had said. It's how they sell things to us, right? You're not good enough. Well, buy our stuff and you'll be better. Oh, that stuff didn't work. Well, stuff 2.0 just came out. Maybe that'll work, right? And on we
Right.
go.
Right.
But ultimately, so not good enough, not worthy of love. I'm insignificant or unimportant. I'm not safe or I can't keep myself safe, and I'm defective. So if those are the lenses through which we're seeing everything, then every event that happens, right? And it doesn't, um, in my experience, those are fairly universal, right? They just show up differently depending on the intersectionality of your identities, right? Because are you not good enough because, you didn't get the car you wanted when you turned 16, or are you not good enough because everybody who looks like you on TV is only in these roles and they're not allowed to be in other roles or, that sort of thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
so really understanding that and understanding that none of those are actually truth, but we carry around experiences that we use to quote unquote prove to ourselves that that's true about us, right? You're not good enough, and then also you didn't get that thing you wanted, so that see more uh, that you're not good enough. So sorry.
Oh, wow. I see somebody saying these are like gems and pearls that people are wanting to like put on a t-shirt. What other things do you see Project Humanities team, or do we want to have somebody sort of ask their question of our experts on the panel, or raise an observation? Lupita, you had a comment. Can you unmute and make your comment, Lupita? And I'm not seeing everybody, so I need my team to help me see. Lupita, you'll need to unmute.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry. I had a question, and even going back to the Dr. Lester, you kind of just touched on it, but like how we talked about like people pleasing and status quo. with society. So do you think is people pleasing like within society and to maintain like and to live under a status quo of like a dominant um social culture of how to act, like is it almost, are we automatically indoctrinated or innate to people please? Do we automatically like subconsciously do it? And if so, does that um create challenges or resistance to noticing when people pleasing is actually affecting like your internal and mentally self, like in a bad way, to where you're repeating and saying yes to things that you don't want to know, or in the way that we're talking about how people pleasing and validation can be, a form of self-harm.
Mhm.
I don't know if that made sense.
Mhm. Well, I do know that the podcast speaks to how people pleasing can be emotionally, psychologically, physically problematic for us. That I think what I heard in your question, maybe this is not, it says is if you're indoctrinated into doing it,
Mhm.
then you're doing it so much that you don't know how to get out of it because it's become part of the identity and you watch it bombarding us. And that was my question to Ryan is when you know what your values are and you know that you're not going to do that, how do you move to that space where you're resisting and you're disrupting the status quo by saying, no, I'm not going to do that? And that may explain, I don't know if this is answering, that may explain why the podcasters talk about saying no is not something you can just do immediately, that it needs to be curb. You have to curb the no's. And initially I was confused, like, well, why do you have to curb it? And they said, because it's a habit. And if it's a habit, you have to unlearn it. And it can't necessarily be something that's just done like overnight, like you've snapped right out of it. So maybe does that sort of respond to a little bit of what she's asking, Sheets, based on what you hear the question as or the observation?
Yeah, I think so. And I would just suggest if you're someone who's starting to explore like how do I do this less because this is the message that I've been given my whole life. There's
Mhm.
a really good book and I'm not even going to try to say the author's name because I'm going to butcher it, but it's called The Courage to Be Disliked.
Okay.
And it is Adlerian, but it's about that. Like, how do I let go of this like master narrative that I've been hearing my whole life and just start showing up as my authentic self and have better boundaries, be able to say no and not feel like now I'm a horrible person that's going to be pushed out.
Okay. Well, and just so that you know, we will have a resource list of whatever has been referenced here or if other references that people want to put into the chat, because I know we've got Dr. Dana Harmon, who's also a practice social worker and clinician. So if there are things here that we're not, please, please, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure that's in the resource that you get. Let's transition into strategies because we spent some time sort of trying to identify the problem. Let's see if we can come up with some solutions. And I don't mean solution in the sense where people are asking me, well, racism exists. Can you tell me how to fix it? That to me is a comment I get a lot after some race incidents. And to me, that feels like it's like people pleasing again. It's like, you tell me what to do as an ally, I will go do it. And if it doesn't work, it's really on you, not on me. So it feels like it's still under that umbrella of people pleasing. Give me a solution. And I read another piece by Dr. Stacy Patton where she's talking specifically through the lens of race. And she's saying white people a lot want to come to black and brown people and ask how to fix things, or straight people want to go to LGBTQ people and say how to fix things. And the response is, well, I can't fix it because I didn't create it. So let's talk about some strategies, both those that were listed in the podcast and some that we might add to that list. So strategies. Now you know there's an issue. We've identified that we have at some point been a people pleaser. We may be still people pleasing, but if it's making us have all these kinds of physiological responses that we don't like, the resentment, the guilt, the shame, the anger, then how do you start sort of moving out of that space? So this is our strategy section.
So that was brilliant because I just took sort of therapy in terms of like walking alongside people and saying, well, why do you think I can fix your life, right? To that piece of like, why do you think I can fix racism?
Mm.
And I think it's
Or
interesting to be able
sexism.
to respond to, homophobia, transphobia, racism, gendered
Mhm.
prejudice, and back to and say, yeah, how do we fix it, or how do you fix it, or how, one of the things that I often say in the trainings that I give, right? Because I'm standing in front of, and most of y'all don't know this, I'm 6'4" as well, so I'm also big, right? So I have so much ridiculous privilege every room I step in, and I always talk about that. And as a social worker, one of my jobs is to make sure that I use that to make sure to be a voice of the unheard, which social workers are supposed to do anyway, but I can do in a much more profound way in certain spaces than Erica can do. And so it's on me to do that and to put myself at risk, understanding that she's at risk every single day, right? And be able to go and at least speak truth to power in those ways, right? Or whether it's lobbying the legislature because they'll listen to me more so, or whether it's just talking to one individual person, or training of 10 people that I'm training, and have them, talk about implicit bias, and then have that one person who happens to be a mental health professional, but also wants to challenge the idea of implicit bias and say, I'm sorry, but that's not true. And have someone who looks like me tell them that, because it's a very different experience and it's a very different conversation that they'll have with someone who looks like the two of you. Right.
Mhm.
Yep, that's why we will ask you to return stuff when we don't have receipts, Ryan, because you'll be less questions. So, Dr. Dana, you want to chime in, and then we'll go back to our strategies, or you may be offering Dr. Dana Harmon, another social worker professor.
Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be in this space, but it's wonderful to be in this space with Ryan, with fellow social workers, with Ryan and Dr. Erica,
Yes.
and as well as my former professor, Dr. Lester. So
Thank
I
you for
always
joining
learn
us.
from him for many, many years. But I want a couple of things. One thing that Ryan just said about what social workers should be doing as a Black woman who's been in social work for many years, on the education side as well as practitioner side, but more so on the education side, is what social workers should do doesn't always happen. And a lot of it, I think, stems from my identity as a Black woman who is a very, Dr. Lester knows this, vocal, strong. We're talking about background, our childhood. That's my foundation on both sides of my family. So I get more and more discouraged with
Mm.
social workers on the education side than I never had to experience on the practitioner side. And social work education is primarily made up of white women. And more, I think they're the biggest perpetrators of a lot of inequities and things that occur inside and outside the classroom. Um, but in terms of strategy, I had put in the chat,
Mhm.
um, is about setting boundaries. So
Mhm.
with students, I talk about boundaries. In my personal life, I try to do that. And
Mhm.
then with clients. However, though, I'm always I won't say I'm a people pleaser. I like caring for people. I don't really,
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's two different things in a sense. But
Mhm.
because I like taking care of people, and made people have a difficult time when I do say no. And
Mhm.
now I'm setting boundaries. And
Mhm.
so, because most of my life has been yes, 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 because of who I am, then when I step back and set these boundaries, I get from friends, family, more so, well, what's wrong with Dana? Why does she
Mhm.
have an attitude and this? So then that can impact me and other people physically and mentally.
Mhm.
So when you try to do self-care,
Mhm.
which I think Ryan or Dr. Erica mentioned is part of, we have code of ethics. So when you try to utilize that professionally as well as personally, it doesn't always work well. It can be detrimental in some ways to set boundaries as a strategy to take care of yourself because of the reaction that other people have toward you because you've always been that. So I just want to say, but I think a strategy is still set boundaries
Oh,
though. I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I ended a friendship like a week
Mhm.
ago because of that.
Mhm.
And I'm going to see them in a month. So it's going to be
Mhm.
interesting to see how those dynamics play
Mhm.
out
Mhm.
we're going to be in that space. But thank you for the
Well,
time.
but
This is wonderful. I'm sharing this with my students too. Probably
thank you.
tomorrow when
Thank
I see them
you.
in class. We're going to, I
Thank
mean,
you.
Wednesday, we're going to change shift a little bit. We're going to
Right.
talk about people pleasing
Right.
because
Well,
a lot of
thank
my students say that they are that,
Well, thank
right?
you.
And
Thank you.
yeah,
You
so
know that's interesting about the boundaries though, because and you talked about reassessing the relationship, because one of the points that's made in the podcast is really about trust and trustworthiness. And if in fact your relationship has to be reset because you established a boundary, then maybe that's an opportunity to reassess that friendship.
Well, and my absolute favorite quote about boundaries is the only people who are upset about your boundaries are people who were benefiting from your lack of them.
Mm.
And so it's a question, do people really love us if they're only happy with us if we do what they want and we don't set our own boundaries? Because from my perspective, people who actually love me, they honor my boundaries. They appreciate that if I don't have the bandwidth for that, then that's okay. And let me know, as opposed to, oh, you're not going to do, what you did. But kind of like Dr. Dana was saying, yeah, I mean that if you've been doing it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years with somebody, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's gonna be a shock to the entire system because from a systems theory perspective, right? Relationships, families, couples are self-regulating systems. And so the system itself, when I have a couple on my couch, it's not that I'm working with two individuals on themselves, it's that I'm working with the dynamic between two individuals. And so instead of the identified patient being this person or this person, the identified patient is the relationship and is the dynamic. And so when you're trying to shift the dynamic, it'll try to self-regulate the other direction. And so you see it in family therapy as well, where one person decides to step out of the family dynamic and not do that toxic thing anymore, or not be a part of this whole, negative system. And the entire family tries to pull them back into their role because the family says, what are you talking about? This is what you do. Why aren't you doing it anymore? And so, yeah, so setting boundaries and stopping people pleasing can be quite a cluster sometimes.
Well, Dr. Erica, going back to your experience, especially with play, um, tell me about how that works in childhood boundaries, though, because sometimes childism doesn't necessarily allow those same kinds of boundary settings and you said that you offered that that sort of behavior of people pleasing starts in childhood. We're saying as an adult, we can talk about boundaries. I know we can talk about boundaries, but how do you approach, or how does one approach boundaries when we're talking about children? In the
Uh,
same context.
Yeah, and it's difficult because as a society, we don't think children have the right to establish their own boundaries,
Mhm.
right? They don't have the right to say no to an adult because it's an adult. And then there's a cultural piece that comes in as well with different cultures, how children should be seen and not heard, things like that. But I'm still teaching kids, like, you're still allowed to have a feeling about this or have a thought about how this makes you feel, whether our parents understand it. And so obviously in my case, the parents are also involved in understanding, like, this is important. We need to hear what they're saying. But I can't see everybody. So I know there are kids who don't get that.
Right.
But it does, like, it's that piece of, you still have agency, right? You're still able to use your voice. And yes, somebody might not like it. And I can say, as an adult for myself, I set boundaries with someone earlier this year, and their response was, we don't need boundaries. And I was like, well, that's exactly why I'm setting a boundary. Right. So it's starting that message
Okay.
earlier, like giving them the tools to speak up when appropriate, right? You can't tell your mom, I'm moving out, I'm 6 years old, I don't want to live in this house anymore. Like,
Yeah.
still appropriate boundaries.
Right. Right. Right.
When Ryan was saying his quote, I was like, oh, that's so funny, because my favorite quote about boundaries is, boundaries are the distance where I can love both me and you at the same time. Right. So
Repeat
it's,
that. Repeat that again for us.
boundaries are the distance in which I can love both you and me at the same time. So
Okay.
coming from that place is like, it's not a hard no. It's,
Right.
this is what I need for me so I can show up for you another time.
Right. Right. Well, you mentioned the hard no because that's also in as part of the strategies that the podcaster suggests, the difference between a hard no and a soft no. They caution us on those soft no's. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And what I'm hearing is that this is ongoing. You don't get like a certificate at the end of this because you've sort of become the non-people pleaser. And this goes back to this fact that the self isn't static, that we have to know what the values are and then continually reflect on those. But let's talk about the hard nose and the soft nose relative to people pleasing. Did you buy the way they sort of separated those?
Yeah, it kind of reminded me, and I think when we were having the initial discussion about this, women especially are more likely to fawn, right? We're more likely to give in, we're more likely to do that soft no, I can't do it right now. The kids got soccer and I got this and I got that. But call me later, maybe things will change. Where, men were more likely to be like, no, I can't. Right. Like they don't give that extra explanation.
Right.
To me, I was like, I don't, it's not a hard, we don't want a hard no right away, but we also don't want too soft of a soft no.
Okay.
Right. I don't want to over explain myself. I can say, hey, I can't do it. I'm really busy today.
Right.
That to me, that's still a soft no, but the over explaining still feels like I'm still trying to make you like me
Right.
and
Okay.
still find me as acceptable. So I was like, maybe a medium no instead of a
Right.
hard
Okay.
no.
Well, if you don't say, if it's not clear though, then the podcasters point out, then people will come back and say, well, you didn't say no. You said no, not now. Um, and maybe this doesn't fit. I'm trying to, no, this is not the same. The fact is you don't want to leave the door open if it's something you know you're not going to want to do. If somebody's inviting me to a sports game, I'm not going to want to do that. If they want to hang out, then we're not necessarily going to go to a bar. So just say no. And then if they still want to hang out and do something else, we can do something else. But I don't want them to invite me to a bar 6 times. And I'm saying I don't do bars and I don't do sports events. Okay. Just hard no.
Mhm.
Um, but then those who know you wouldn't ask you to do that anyway.
And
That's,
that's the missing piece,
that's the
right?
piece.
If
Yeah.
we are truly connected and you truly see me and know me and understand me, you know what my boundaries are. Like that's been communicated very early on. Like you know
Right.
what's acceptable and it's not. I laugh, so I'll pick on Ryan. I get one shopping day during the holidays because I know that's his limit, right?
Oh,
He'll give me one day and I got 6 hours and that's it. And
and
I've
he's
learned
got a
after
timer too.
he does, he'll be like, okay, we're done.
Right.
And that's done. I start Christmas shopping in October. I'm not
Okay.
bringing him along for that. I know that that's a hard no for him. I'm not doing it. So,
Right. Well, I can think of because I've been really reflecting on that relative to partners and thinking of times when I will say, okay, I'll go to a seafood restaurant, but I really don't want to go to a seafood restaurant. Well, I don't feel resentment going. It's just not something I would enjoy. So we want to make sure that what we are doing is sort of navigating the space between, yeah, every now and then you can do something that makes you, I mean, it's not life altering if I go to a restaurant that I didn't really want to go to that one time, but I don't want to keep going to restaurants that I know I don't like just to please somebody. And that's where the resentment comes in. So we're not going to do sushi. We will find another option because I'm not going to do that. That's a hard no. That's not even a soft no. Okay. So there are some things, and I don't want to go sit there because there's nothing I can eat. So there are ways in which we have to navigate that because there is a spectrum. I don't think there's like this absolute, but they do talk about over explaining. And you just talked about that too, is people who say no and then they have to explain all these things. So just say no. Just can't do it. It's not my cup of tea. I've got too many things to do, or it's just not something that I'd be interested in. Just say that. And then they say that people will be more respectful when you let them know and you're not vacillating and moving back and forth. What about that whole notion of the power of the pause? Recognizing that a desire, the difference between an obligation and a desire, and a suggestion and a demand. Did you find anything helpful in that sort of distinction as a strategy? The power
I
of the
think it's
pause.
I think there's so much power in pause, period. Just because we're so fast all the time, we're so overstimulated all the time, our relationships are so fast all the time. And so slowing down enough to actually figure out what I want to do before I say yes. And then 5 seconds later, I'm like, crap, why did I say yes? I actually meant, and then I'm stuck because I said yes and I can't go back and all that kind of thing. And so, there's a reason why like every culture ever has some mindfulness practices built into its spirituality or its cultural connection or something like that. because we need to slow down and we are so fast all the time. And so, yeah, I think the power of the pause, even in that, and oddly, we think that someone's going to get offended, or we think, but I've been in therapy sessions and I don't know what to say necessarily right then, and I slow down a little bit and I think and I come back all the way to uh, issues between Dr. Eric and I when there's conflict. I mean, not that there is ever, but if there was, what would happen? One of the things that I teach couples is that pause, is that slow down and responding automatically to emotional pressures, right? Whether it's the pressure to conform, or whether it's the pressure to please, or whether it's the pressure to placate, or whether it's pressure that I'm angry and frustrated and then I lash out at someone.
Right.
But slowing down enough is a concept called differentiation of self, which is what my doctoral work is about. And it's this idea of that I can stay fully connected to you while also staying fully myself.
Right.
And so that's what's required, is to be able to say, hey, I'm not going to meet this expectation that you have of me, and I still want to be connected to you. And you can be mad at me if you need to, because this is who I am and this is where I am. And if our relationship can sustain that, that's awesome. But the problem is sometimes it really can't,
Hmm.
right? And then we lose relationship in that.
Hmm.
And so it becomes difficult. So I have stories. Dr. Eric and I do a marriage retreat every year, and we both have stories about where we ran into some of these things with each other. And one of the best evaluations we get at the end is when people say, "It's so nice that you guys don't have it all figured out either, that you guys
Hmm.
still struggle with some of these things."
Hmm.
Because it's that, like, how do I, like, I'm definitely, I would say, correct me, honey. I would definitely say that I'm the people pleaser in the relationship, and I'm the one who's always sort of looking to be validated.
Hmm.
And so when I get to a place where I'm like, no, that is absolutely not a yes for me. But again, it takes that pause, and
Hmm.
I think to myself, and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that, or that's not what I'm interested in. And then
Hmm.
saying that, and there have been
Hmm.
times where I was like, and it's silly if you know the story, but it's silly that I would think this, but I'm like, is this going to lead to like the end of this relationship? Is this like a
Hmm.
relationship ending violation to say no
Hmm.
to this?
Hmm.
And then invariably it's not, at least 20 years in, but
Hmm.
it feels like that sometimes, especially if you're on the people pleasing side of the continuum.
Oh, this is an interesting moment. I feel like there needs to be a response from you, Dr. Erica, on that. Because Ryan says he feels like he's the people pleaser. And you
And
nodded yes.
he is. So I'm a middle child. I have fought my entire life to not be like having to conform anymore. And when we got married, I said, I'm so sorry. Like, it is what it is now. Like, I'm no longer conforming. So either you get on my train or you don't.
Ooh.
And but now we've learned to better compromise.
Okay.
20 years later, we've learned to compromise.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Yes, yes, yes. Um, okay. They also mentioned journaling and observing one's behavior with yeses and nos. I wonder if anybody in the audience has done that. Do you journal about the extent to which you say yes to things you don't want to say? And the nos? I don't know if anybody actually does that in real life, do they? I mean, certainly people will journal about how they're feeling about things, but do people keep a tally necessarily? Anybody out there? I journal and reflect on my. It went too fast. Yep, somebody does it in Google Docs. So people do journal. Is that helpful in terms of looking at the patterns of your decisions and the extent to which you're saying yes, but not really feeling like you really want to say yes? Are people mentally a mental tally? Very good. What else are you seeing in the chat?
I think that's important, right? And I don't think we do it enough,
Okay.
right? Because I think you forget how often you say yes when you
Okay.
really don't want to, because sometimes it's just automatic. So actually having that visual of like how many things that I agree to that weren't really feeding my soul, right? Like
Right.
to see it in black and white sometimes is like, oh, I got to make a change. It's too much.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually wrestling with something that I committed to doing that I really don't want to do, but I'm doing it because I feel like I have to do.
Mhm.
But I'm also trying to navigate around how I can do it on my terms rather than on the terms that were presented. So I do think that we can massage things. And I'm not going to feel resentful. I'll just probably do it just because we've had this conversation. And as long as I'm not feeling some kind of way about it while I'm doing it. And then assessing and knowing your personal bandwidth. I think that can sometimes be confused with overextending. Because if you're overextended and you have all these things to do, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to do this. It just means you're recognizing that you have too much to do and you don't want to be resentful of making a decision about something that you wish you had said no to. Does that make sense? Knowing your bandwidth is kind of I don't know if we all easily access our bandwidth. Aren't we all supposed to? Well, I actually have a family member who is very good at establishing their bandwidth because they will say no in like a heartbeat without having to think. And sometimes I wish I had that, but they seem to be, more at peace with the decisions they make. Now, I can't assess that because I'm not inside, but it can lead to all these things when you don't know your bandwidth. How do you know when you know what your bandwidth is? Dr. Ryan, I think you mentioned that word first, bandwidth.
I don't know. I'll let you know when I get to the end of,
Okay.
no, I'm just kidding. I actually, so we we were in grad school together. We actually met in diversity and oppression class, which I still think is the funniest thing. But so we were in grad school together. We ended up getting married over the course of grad school, had one kid. Erica was pregnant with our middle child when she walked across the graduation stage for her master's. And then she was a year behind me. I took 3 years to get my master's. She took 3 years. But once she graduated, we both looked at each other and went, "We're home at like 5:30. What are we gonna do?" And so we're like, "Let's start a practice. Let's start another business. Let's do something else." And so we're probably not the greatest people to ask about bandwidth because Erica's a Maricopa County court-appointed special advocate. She's a CASA, in addition to seeing kids, in addition to the administrative side of the practice, in addition to, and so we're both always doing so many things
Mhm.
that I think we're probably exceeding our bandwidth on a regular basis. But like I said, it's just such cool stuff. Like it's stuff that's so aligned with who we are. Maybe I should talk for you. It's aligned with who I understand myself to be. So it's so hard to say no to the amazing things we get to do.
I would say something that I started doing about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the ideal week, like organizing your week ahead of time. And so I still use a paper calendar and it's color
Mm.
coded. So work is one color, free time is another color, and anything outside of those boxes. So if I take on an extra client outside of my like set work hours, I can visually see you just gave up time that was set aside for something else. Like, are you okay with that?
Mhm.
Right? Tomorrow's Tuesday, and I'm looking forward to it because I have a 2 hour nap in my schedule every Tuesday because it's like, that used to be a class day and now I don't have that class. So I sleep during that time. So like things like that, like because I do think and I think Ryan, you might have said it earlier, like we just go. We're
Right.
so busy. We're so busy. There's so much to do, and we feel like we're obligated to do so many things. But when you can visually see how much of your downtime, how much of your self-care time you're actually giving up for these things. And if it's not something that's rewarding, I
Mhm.
think that's where you can start to shift and you can start saying that no, when you can visually see, like, wow, I just gave 6 hours to something I didn't even want to do when I could have been with my family or I could have been taking my 2 hour nap. So
Well, I think that's the difference, though, is you said stuff that you don't want to do. If the stuff is bringing you joy and it's satisfying, then we do it. We overcommit because we want to do this. We want to do this, and we get something out of it. Now, I can only, as we move toward the end here, I can only filter what you all have said and what you just said with the response that I got from one of you last night and the response that I didn't get from the other of you. I wonder if that somehow is part of the lens because it wasn't an assignment. It was, here's some ideas. And one of you said, well, we'll respond to you tonight or tomorrow night. And I heard from one of you, but not the other. Is that the people pleasing one who got the assignment in on time? And the other said, I know what I'm talking about.
The
I
other one
read
was
this.
sleeping, Dr. Lester.
See, now I'm filtering everything through the lens of this now. In
and
this.
I so this is because Ryan's like, oh, don't forget you got to respond. And this is another boundary that I have. I cannot respond to emails from my phone. So I have to physically get up and go sit at a desk to respond to an email now because
Right.
I can read them, but I needed that separation because I was doing work all the time. And so when we got home last night, we've been in a dance competition all day. I said, you know what? I'll follow up tomorrow.
Yeah, well, and you know what? And life is going on, and I think it was certainly a satisfying conversation for me. I want to make sure there's nothing burning out there that somebody really needs to ask before we sort of wrap it up. Because let me pause and see if there's something burning, a comment or an observation that you want to address because you won't be able to sleep tonight if we don't ask this question or make this observation. Is there anything out there like that? Is something burning on your screen now or burning at your keyboard? Okay, well, I don't see any steam coming out, so that is good. I am so glad that we had this conversation. I have learned a lot. I've learned a lot about you two. I'm really excited to share some of the resources that you shared. We'll be adding some others too. We have these conversations all the time. They're different, and we are so appreciative of those who are joining us for the first time, but also those who have been with us several times. So if you'll pull up that last slide, whoever's running the slides, and we will.
Dr. Lester, can I make one small plug?
Oh, absolutely.
So somebody said right at the end of your pause, self-care, please. And I just wanted to mention I actually am the director of therapy, sport, and counseling at the Franciscan Renewal Center, where we offer 6 sessions of professional therapy from volunteer therapists who give their time to anyone in need for a donation to the ministry. And it's non-faith based, so people of any faith or no faith are happily welcome. And
Wow.
so people just reach out, and then we connect them for the 6 sessions. And so I think that's a huge self-care thing that they've been doing since the 70s there that can be really helpful for people to at least start the process in terms of therapy, and then be able to see whether it works for them or it's something they want to do, or they want to do more long-term stuff.
Well, can you make sure that we get a link to that so that we'll
Absolutely.
be combing the chat and anybody else who has a different resource, please put that in and we'll send that resource out within the week. Um, I want to thank everybody for coming. Remember, Project Humanities brings people together to talk, listen, and connect. I challenge and invite you to sign our Humanity 101 pledge. These values are across cultures. We don't define them for you. We know that people know what self-reflection is, compassion, kindness, all those things that seem to be missing in the headlines and the actions that we're reading in Minneapolis. And all over the world right now, we have to remind ourselves that there is humanity and people are caring about each other and people are still fighting for justice. There's a feedback form. Please feel free to fill that out. We do like your responses and your feedback, and stay tuned for the email. We'll ask those who are still on the call if you will unmute your video and your audio so we can snap a picture so that we can show people that we were actually here tonight uh, for our MLK education experience. So, team, would you get ready to sort of take our gallery picture of all
Yeah,
the
I
people?
can grab it. I just need I need people to get unpinned so I can get more of the screen. So I don't have the control for that.
Okay. I
But
don't know
thank
what
you.
that means. What does that mean, unpinned?
You guys are pinned, so it only shows you three on my screen. So whenever you guys go away, I get more of the viewers.
Okay. Do y'all know what she's talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Tell
Okay,
us when you're ready.
okay, I'll count down from three.
Okay.
3, 2, 1. Perfect. Thank you guys.
Okay. Just one? Okay, you got all of us. Thank you,
Yep, I
thank
got
you,
it.
thank you. We are so excited. I see some of the students out there too. So thank you all. Continue. Let's make this a happy new year. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can be better, and we can do our part to make it better. So good to see you, students. I'll see you on Wednesday, and just write one pager about the strengths and weaknesses so that you get credit for it. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a wonderful conversation, and I learned a lot, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to sort of share some personal stuff and some professional stuff. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Happy Monday, and Happy New Year again.
Thank you very much.
All right. Good evening, good night, good day, goodness.
Ah.